there are several reasons why there is a passive citizenry that we are talking about. The first is the legacy issue. If you lived under an authoritarian system, you have no experience of what it means to be an active citizen. And unfortunately, post-1994, we also had a government in its anxiety to be seen to be different from the past government, focusing on the issue of we will do this for you, we will do that for you, etc. And so that reinforced wait and be passive. Second, we failed to educate for democracy. Constitutional democratic systems are very complex systems, as we have seen in the recent debates. People have to understand the difference between a parliamentary democratic system and a constitutional democratic system. That educational process didn't happen. And finally, unlike countries like the US and many other European countries, we don't have civic education very much anchored in our school curricula so that young people can grow up understanding what it means to be a citizen of a democracy.
Now, those are the reasons why we do not have an active citizenry. But if you were to define then active citizenry for somebody who really is unaware or ignorant of what it is, where would you start? What is active citizenry?
It means you are a conscious person who is asserting your rights in terms of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, which means you need to know what's in that Bill of Rights. And second, that you are assuming your responsibilities. It's not just rights, it is also responsibilities. We now have a Bill of Rights, I'm told, which has been accepted by the Department of Education, which I would urge every South African to look at and see how they are conducting themselves in relation to that. Every right has got a corresponding responsibility. My right to be heard has a responsibility to hear other people. My right to be respected has a corresponding responsibility of respecting others. And that's the kind of dialogue that needs to take place in our society.
But again, some may argue, and of course your conclusion is that we are not active as citizens of this country, but some may argue that actually South Africans have always been very active, and hence the involvement in the political struggle of this country. They continued with such things as protests. You hear of tax boycotts, rate boycotts, where people are unhappy about the provisions of municipalities and so on. There are associations such as Stokvels, associations of informal traders. That South Africans are actually active.
Yes, indeed. South Africans have a history of being active. In fact, one of the reasons for passivity post-94 is that we didn't acknowledge our own contribution to the freedom that we are now enjoying. We allowed people to assume that they liberated us. And people then go back into that, I can't do it, even if you know you did it. You know, on the factory floor, in the schools, in the streets, you were protesting and you were actively seeking to liberate this country. But that then ties back to the nature of the activity post-94. If you look at it, there is on one hand active civil society, very active. There are about 100,000 civil society organizations. But when it comes to the individual citizen, there is a tendency for those, particularly when you look at so-called service delivery protests, there is an element of self-sabotage which happens in those. How do you explain that because there aren't enough school places for your children, you go and burn the only school that exists? Because there isn't enough there are not enough libraries, you burn the library that you have. That self-sabotage tendency is globally recognized as an aftermath of abusive, brutalized societies, that people who have been subjected to abuse, even as children, when they grow up into adults, they tend to take on behaviors that are sabotaging their own progress. And this is what we are observing in South Africa. So we really are a wounded people that need to have conversations around which we can heal ourselves.
Self-sabotage versus anger at an unresponsive state.
Yes, if you are angry and you know you are the owner of the state, it's not the state as the state is not something that should be conflated with the government. The government may be unresponsive. The state is the common property for all of us. And so you must protect your assets, which are represented in the state. If you are angry at the government, you must protest against the government, but don't destroy your own assets. I mean, it's like if I'm angry at home at something not going right, I'm not going to destroy the windows of my house. It doesn't make sense. That only happens when you are a passive, aggressive subject.
Sure. Let's get other views, then we'll come back to this, because others argue that that is one form of an engagement with the state. Yes, it is negative, but it is active form of engagement with the state and with the government. Let me bring in Commissioner Bridget Gasa. She joins us on the line now from Port Elizabeth. A very good morning to you, Commissioner. Commissioner, of course, of the National Planning Commission. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mamphela, and morning to the listeners of this AFM.
Thank you very much. My apologies. I believe that you're not very well this morning, but nonetheless, we'll just see how far we can go, because I would like to get the view from the National Planning Commission of, firstly, why is it necessary that we should start engaging in discussions about an active citizenry?
Thank you, Mamphela. The National Planning Commission proceeded with its work from the understanding that the attainment of all of the objectives that are listed in the National Development Plan will facilitate nation building and social cohesion. What we emphasized in the plan were additional measures that would be required to further unite the nation and bring about high levels of social cohesion. Now, social cohesion is an outcome made up of quite a number of other components. The subsets that make up social cohesion in our understanding is it talks to how do we as a country create necessary conditions for all of our people, how do we create opportunities and extract the capabilities that are inherent in every citizen, which will enable our people to live the kinds of life that they desire. We are then proposing at its core of the National Development Plan a fundamental paradigm shift which needs to happen, shifting from a paradigm of self-entitlement, which my panel member has spoken about, into a developmental paradigm. And that takes a citizenry that is very conscious about what is happening in its environment, and to what extent do people then say, you are not going to make decisions about me without me. I take full responsibility and accountability in drafting the kind of future and the kind of country that I would like to live in a number of years to come. So what we've been finding is that in the absence of that active voice from citizenry, the state, of course, would make its own articulations in terms of how they need to solve the societal problems that we have, almost in lacking the influence of Umkhize from Mtubatuba, articulating his voice about what he thinks is necessary to improve the lot of his life.
But let's pick up on that.
In a summary, that's what we
Yeah, but let me pick up on that, because there's an SMS again that came through earlier. I read it just at the beginning of the program, because people are saying, well, but are there platforms for Umkhize to make his voice heard?
Well, in one part there haven't been, but in another there has been. You know, we come from a culture where we used to place a lot of reliance on society mobilizing itself. We talk about problems that beset us in our communities, but then we don't end at talking about those kinds of problems. Mkhize then becomes part and parcel of how do we then extract ourselves from whatever it is that would have bound us so that we don't achieve the progress that we want. So as long as citizens we are going to rely on somebody to create those platforms for us, I don't suppose that we would get any far. So what we're lobbying for when we talk about active citizenry. It may be a complex word, but it's actually fairly simple. It's a combination of how we understand our rights as citizens, but also how we understand our obligations. And in understanding those rights and obligations, what is the link that individuals have to the state? There are certain things as citizens, of course, that we need to do, which includes paying our taxes, obeying laws, and exercising a range of political and civil and social rights to improve the quality of our own lives. And I suppose what we're saying, Xolani, is that we've left that to the determination of somebody else, and in most instances, the state and government in particular.